The views and opinions expressed on Where Did the Road Go belong to the person speaking them. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of other people on the show or the show as a whole. This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by the following amazing individuals: Greg Ross, Billuminati, Allison Cook, Yvonne Williams, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, and Michael Frisky. Thank you all for helping to make this show possible. And if you'd like to help out, become a patron at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month for lots of extra content.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I have back Mr. Joshua Cuthcin.
Hello, good to be back again.
And by popular request, Red Pill Junkie. You think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding. People are like, when are you going to have Red Pill on again?
I'm very thankful for the two people who constantly demand me to return. Thank you guys.
It's more than two. People love you, man.
Hey, I mean, I think it's been so long since the three of us have been together. This counts as like a legacy sequel, right?
Right. Oh, and people are upset that Miguel's not on more, and people love it when you're on, Josh. So I mean, that's a good mix.
Yeah, we're getting there. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. I can feel it in my bones. It's going to be a great show.
We have nothing at all to talk about. Oh, wait.
Right.
So we're going to be talking about a subject that came up that I'm not that familiar with, but you two seem to be very interested in, which is the connection between UFO sightings and nuclear stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of become something of a parroted response to, the UFO question. It's like, when we started seeing UFOs in 47, with the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and like there's an argument to be made that like that's the modern UFO era.
Yeah.
I'll buy into that, but I mean UFOs have been around, I think, since time immemorial. I mean, Albeck and Vallee's Wonders in the Sky, certainly suggests as much. But what I think is interesting is the way that the phenomenon seemed to something does. I will admit that something about the phenomenon seems to have changed, or that was an inflection point around that time. And there are some people who have suggested that it's all tied up with the Trinity explosion and or Parsons and Crowley and the Babylon working and all those shenanigans. So
right.
It all is sort of a part of this sort of atomic age saucer scene. That's sort of my initiatory or introductory 2 cents. Miguel, if you want to have anything to add.
It's difficult to ascertain how much the development of nuclear technology, nuclear energy, nuclear weapons has had any effect, if any, in the interactions we have with the UFO phenomenon. The late Stan Friedman was totally convinced, and this is an argument I keep hearing again and again, especially among the people who are promoting disclosure, that after the explosion of the first atomic bombs, first in Trinity, then in Japan, that it was something like a beacon signal, for the big boys in the universe to pay closer attention to us. Something like some people have used the argument of, imagine if one of those undiscovered tribes in some faraway island suddenly discovered, nuclear energy. Of course, you would have tried to take a closer look, even if you had some kind of like policy not to interfere with their development. And in a sense, it makes sense. I mean, it goes along with our notions about how the phenomenon should behave in a very sci-fi prime directive kind of way, right? That's the moment that the humans develop nuclear energy. It's almost like the moment in the Star Trek universe where humans develop warp warp drive capacity, and that's when the Vulcans finally decide, okay, let's let's pay a visit. Live long and prosper. But I'm not sure if I'm okay with that, because on the one hand, like Joshua said, this phenomenon goes way back, way before the development of nuclear energy, and also because our data seems to be very skewed. Like we seem to have some data about incursions of UFO activity around nuclear sites in the United States. We have a little bit of data about similar things happening in the Soviet Union, but it's not like the Soviet Union and the United States are the only countries with nuclear energy plants or storing nuclear weapons. What about France? What about India, for example? What about Israel? So I think that we need to have a clearer view about what happens in other countries before we raise the categorically point that, UFOs are interested in our nuclear capabilities for some reason.
Right. And I also think that there are ways of thinking about this sort of correlation and causation that are worth unpacking too. There's this assumption that the space people think that this other group of space people, us, has sort of crossed some sort of Rubicon and now might harm them with these atomic weapons. And it's like, people forget how really dodgy those early nuclear tests were. And like before the first bomb was detonated, they thought that it could literally incinerate the entire atmosphere, and they just sort of crossed their fingers. So who's to say that there isn't some sort of metaphysical cost for the detonation of atomic weaponry and for doing things on the nuclear level, right?
Right.
And by which I mean, maybe it's space ghosts who think that if we do this too much, we'll tear asunder the fabric of space and time.
Sure.
Or, who's to say that that's not what happened, The pre-nuclear and post-nuclear eras are so different that, for all I know, we already did split off into a splinter universe.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that I read a long time ago in this really groundbreaking book, Morning of the Magicians.
Mm-hmm.
It's a book that was published in the 1960s. It was kind of like before the whole counterculture really took off. It's a book by Jacques Pauwels and Jacques Bergier, I think.
Bergier, yeah, and who Pauwels was, I believe, responsible for introducing Charles Fort's work to France.
Mm. Right, and Jacques Bergier was a friend of Jacques Vallee. He's mentioned several times in his Forbidden Science memoir journals. He was a nuclear physicist, and he also was like a survivor of the concentration camps. And for a time, he was even a counterintelligence spy. He probably was one of the people responsible for the Germans not to acquire a nuclear weapon. Anyway, back to the anecdote that really caught my attention in Morning of the Magicians. Supposedly, Bergier had an encounter with someone that he considered to be an alchemist. And this person, before the actual official development of nuclear energy, warned Bergier about the dangers of such a technology, and in ways that really echoed or even predated the similar warnings that were given to UFO contactees by the Space Brothers 20 or 30 years later. So according to this individual, who was never actually identified, some people say, this guy is Fulcanelli or some legendary alchemist. Other people tried to pinpoint the person. Anyway, according to this individual, nuclear technology had been developed in our world thousands of years before our time, and to such a degree that very advanced civilizations had risen and then destroyed themselves. And akin to the things that we have heard in interpretations about, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, these Vedic texts from ancient India, which some people, rightfully say that those interpretations are very biased and skewed. But nevertheless, it's interesting. There are similar places in the world, like, I don't know, Mohenjo-daro or some places in the Indus Valley where I remember some people saying that they had higher levels of, radioactivity that seems to suggest either, a nuclear blast or maybe, a natural, some natural explanation, like maybe some cosmic collision, like a meteor blast or something. But there you go. No, we seem to have had from the beginning this idea that nuclear technology was this threshold. There's this something very forbidden about it, and that's something very dangerous. And with the contactees, there was this comforting notion of, some people are looking out after us, and going to make sure that we're not like children burning our hands with matches.
Well, and the ancient Indian texts, I mean, they may be taken out of context, but not really, because they're talking about devastating weapons of war that very much describe weapons of mass destruction that have the similarities of what you see with nuclear fallout. The cities that were uncovered there that were absolutely decimated had high radiation readings. But also, you have the one physicist there who said there's an element on Mars in the atmosphere.
John Brandenburg.
Thank you.
Yes.
Xenon 129, which is only observed in the aftermath of nuclear detonations. Which, who knows? There might be. I have a friend who works at JPL, and we talked about that, and he was sort of poo-pooing it. It's like, well, maybe just we haven't discovered it in other contexts. But at the same time, that's a pretty compelling detail, I think, and it kind of gets left out when a lot of people will talk about Brandenburg, and they'll just talk about the nuclear holocaust hypothesis of Mars, and they won't bring up that Xenon 129. But once you do that, it's like, oh, this is a bit more compelling now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, could it have been part of the same civilization, or could two different civilizations? I mean, is this just a mammalian waypoint, like mammalian species when they evolve eventually figure out how to split the atom? And also, I mean, assuming these things aren't from another planet, if they're here with us, is that stuff interfering with whatever reality they exist in that we may not ordinarily be able to perceive?
Yeah, I mean, it pairs very well, this idea of UFOs being concerned with our nuclear capabilities, with the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis, the idea that, these beings, whatever they are, wherever they came from originally, are inhabiting our planet now, possibly hidden from ourselves at the bottom of the ocean, or maybe underground, And therefore, that could really, the prospect of nuclear war could really pose a direct threat to them. But on the other hand, why wait until, we monkeys up on the surface are advanced enough to start interfering with them? Why didn't they do a better job of keeping us away from this very dangerous knowledge?
What if they didn't know? That's the thing. Like, when we detonated the first atomic bomb, what if they were like, what the hell was that?
Yeah, they were playing in their version of PlayStation 17 in virtual reality, and all of a sudden they felt a tremor in their chamber, like, uh-oh. Okay,
I was
what's
about
going
to
on
say,
there?
It's like their version of Skyquakes, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or it could be, these things seem to respond to ultraviolet light. What kind of light is an atomic bomb giving off that could maybe affect beings that exist in a different spectrum?
We're talking about John Keel's idea of the superspectrum.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, there's that, but there's also the fact that these things also appear a lot over just power plants in general, don't they? They don't need to be nuclear.
Well, yeah, I can vouch for that, because the lake that I grew up on was formed in part to fuel a coal power plant in North Carolina. They dammed up part of the Catawba River. And there were UFO sightings around the construction of that coal plant, too.
Well, about that, there is something that I wanted to mention for the show, and that's what I dug up my copy of Forbidden Science, Volume 5, Pacific Heights. This is the one part of in the journals of Jacques Vallee that covers the decade from the year 2000 to the year 2009. And in page 66, which describe a NEEDS meeting that Vallee and his associates, the people that were associated with Bigelow at the time, had on January 12th, 2001. So I'm going to read a paragraph from the book. Mm-hmm. Here says, we reviewed recent cases, notably an apparent near landing at the Utah Ranch on 27 December. There have been multiple mutilation investigations since 1998 in Montana, California, and Arkansas, but investigation of the Knoxon, Montana case won't proceed further. Kit, and this is Christopher Kit Green, who is a long-time associate of Vallee on all this group. He is a medical doctor, and he was in charge of the CIA's Weird Desk back in the 60s and 70s when they were sponsoring the famous Psychic Spy program. So this is how Kit Green became associated with Vallee and all these people. So Kit has related to Eric and Colm, this is Colm Kelleher, Eric will be Eric Davis, that on one of his missions to Asia, he had a bodyguard who was a tactical helicopter pilot. The man assured him that his unit had flown 1,000 hours in machines disguised to look like UFOs. He gave no details, but made clear the purpose of the flights was to make certain the guards responded appropriately. That may not explain all the cases, especially when launching sequences were tampered with, but we should take it into account. So what Vallee is talking here is about clandestine military operations that were run over sensitive military bases using human-made machines, flying machines, helicopters that were deliberately designed to look like UFOs.
Yeah.
So we need to take that into account before jumping into the conclusion like, oh yeah, all those UFOs are surveilling military bases. The same way that we also need to take into account nowadays drone incursions that are also taking place in over sensitive military installations.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts on this. This is something that I discussed a bit with a good friend, David Metcalf, and made its way into Fourth Wall Phantoms. Pick up your copy now. But the thing that David has been noticing, and that is an idea that I think is glad that I'm helping sort of push out there, is that it seems as if we don't know anything about UFOs. By which I mean that there are layers upon layers of mediated, controlled narratives at play. One of the things that he was quick to point out was the fact that during the time that there were active crash retrieval programs going on, during the coldest parts of the Cold War, right? When the tensions were most high, things like, I think it's Project Stardust, I believe was the name of one of them, or was it Red Robin or Round Robin? Anyway, those projects were going on that were actually actively working on crash retrievals of Soviet technology. During that time frame, ufologists weren't talking about crash retrieval programs. And then, like a light switch, the Roswell thing happens, and that's all that ufologists want to get their hands on, is crash retrieval stories. So it does feel sometimes like there is a hidden hand that's sort of manipulating where the conversation goes to.
True.
Right. There's also having a wife who worked for the federal government. I can say that behind every FOIA request is a very tired and busy and overworked government employee. And although I don't think my wife ever had to do any, she knew of people who had to do them. And It was kind of like something that they hated to do, not because they were guarding any secrets or anything, but because it was just such a pain in the tail, right?
Yeah.
It's just such a pain to have to do.
Right.
And then, like, what if there's we keep on. I feel like we see this is another idea of David's, but this we see these sort of sensational papers come out under things like FOIA, and the government had a paper that said this, or there was indications that they were researching XYZ. And one of the things he wondered is if there wasn't an entire sort of subculture within some of these government echelons of sort of like make work projects where it's like, hey, Hal, come up with some sort of crazy idea that so that there's a there when people actually FOIA this particular department, so that there's something to turn over. In your free time, do some sci-fi speculation on some sort of crazy idea. So you really just have to kind of start from first premises with the whole UFO question, because there has been this sort of skullduggery baked into the cake from the very beginning, which is why, again, I think short of personal experience, it's a lot of conjecture. It's a lot of shrugs and, well, it seems to be, and it looks as if XYZ, but as far as landing on definitives, if you come to me and you tell me that it's a settled issue that we have crash debris, I'm sympathetic to it. There's a lot of evidence for it, but I'm not going to say that it's a fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something that Vallee goes into in the last volume of his journals, Forbidden Science 6, Scattered Castles. He mentions, for example, the infamous MJ12 papers. And of course, in the 1980s, all of ufologists thought, this is it. This is the Holy Grail. This is the ultimate evidence that the United States not only has recovered, actual crashed alien craft, but they also have alien bodies, maybe even one that is still alive, and maybe through that one survivor, they started to establish an actual relationship with an off-world civilization. But and then, of course, people start to pay attention and say, well, inconsistencies with the MJ12 papers and the things with the typewriter and all. And then, if you ask most of the most respectable researchers, will say that the MJ12 papers are bogus. Now the question is, who hoaxed the papers then? And what was the purpose for it? And then Vallee goes, I think that he contacted people within the Bigelow organization who had ties with the intelligence community, and they were certain, these individuals, that the MJ12 papers were crafted not for the purpose of disinformation initially, but they were something that in the intelligence community is called active measures. Yeah, it's very difficult to understand what active measures mean. It's like, basically, it's kind of like official disinformation or something to that effect. It's like, but basically, the idea is that MJ12 was created to confuse the Soviets, during the heydays of the Cold War. But then someone had made the decision to release these false information to the UFO community, and the rest is history. But my point is that if this is just one example of the kind of stuff that is flying around in the archives of the Pentagon, how are they going to ascertain which information is actually true and which information is was designed to confuse the other side, when the people who were behind these projects, not only are they sworn to silence, but they probably are either retired or dead. So you don't have someone who is capable of actually vouching or betting this information. Yeah. So it becomes a mess.
And if the last, I don't know, coming up on 10 years, I guess, have taught us anything, is that the government is not the United States government is not a monolith. Like, there are factions and there are battle lines that are drawn. And if that can be said about just policy making, then what do you think's going on when it comes to this sort of stuff?
Yes.
I'm not letting this, I'm not letting this organization get their fingers on this because it's mine, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, you read Vallee's journals, and the Spider-Man meme really comes to mind. The idea of that Spider-Man says, "You are the secret UFO program." I said, "No, you are the secret UFO program." No, you both are the secret UFO program. Like all these people using their connections, trying to dig up and trying to find the real UFO program, and just knocking each other, in the dark, and saying, "Well, well, hell, if you're not the secret UFO program, and I'm not the secret UFO program, then who is the secret UFO program?"
Right.
That's
and
a
then
fair
and
point.
then the way that things that seem like truths are utilized for purposes that we can't even conceive of. Like I think it was Walter Bosley who was on here talking about one time about they tell certain people about bases in Antarctica so that they know exactly who's leaking and who's trustworthy, and like this person's base, the pyramids didn't have capstones, so you know exactly who leaked it, because if that story comes out, it's like, well, that's Bob's story. That's the story we gave to Bob.
Yep.
They deliberately insert typos in the handouts, for example, in the infamous Project Serpo.
Right.
And this is a very common way to track, like you said, information leaks. Like, oh, I know that they put this typo in this paragraph, so we can really track down where the leak came from.
Yeah.
And also using those typos, and they can be used as codes.
Yes, that's what I was just going to say.
For spies or agents abroad, like saying, like after the third comma or whatever, that this means something else. That is, if you have the cipher, they give you information.
And that's what I think just doesn't get appreciated by a lot of folks in this space. And I'm not talking down to anybody, and I'm not trying to be a jerk, but like there are wheels within wheels and purposes within purposes that none of us are good at seeing. And I sure as heck am not like the intended audience either. But there are motivations and techniques which a lot of us can barely comprehend, myself included, that could be at play in some of these disclosures and these different sort of shared truths, and the way that there's a slow and steady leak, which means that it does sort of place an importance to me on quite frankly, the purity of lived experience in these stories. Like the experiencer is kind of the person that you should be trying to get your disclosure from.
Right.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, this is something that we try to ask Jacques Vallee about it. There is this idea that the way that the phenomenon alters the perception of the experiencer may, in a way, render the accuracy of their testimony kind of useless for certain purposes. What I'm saying is that if you're not going to probably find a lot of valuable information about, the technology of space hyperdrive from someone who went to watch Star Wars. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the point is that UFOs, if it is a technology, it is a technology that is altering the perception of the witness. So what is there, probably is very different from what they are perceiving.
Right.
Nevertheless, I'm not saying, stop.
No, I know you're not.
To the contrary.
Well, and I know you're not, and another part of that too is like that there could be technologies that we're in possession of that are so advanced that they fool quite frankly experiencers into thinking that it's something completely different. Directed hallucination beams, that sort of thing. Which I think I haven't read Vallee's newest. I haven't read Shattered Castles, but doesn't he talk about something about, in line with like the Havana syndrome stuff, that there can be a directed, some sort of directed energy technology that can produce hallucinations or sensations that are objectively don't exist, but are actually being manipulated through physiology?
There is a little bit of that, although I have to say that of the 6 volumes, the number 6 is the one that is the most frustrating to read about,
Why?
to read through. because it is clear that it is the one in which Jacques was very careful to censor himself and to say, well, we have this meeting with our group, but according to the group rules, I cannot discuss what was really said, aside from a few little tidbits that I'm going to put here. Havana syndrome is not really mentioned in volume 6. So that's telling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that was very telling is that Christopher Bledsoe is not mentioned anywhere in volume 6, which is disturbing and weird, because we know for a fact that a lot of the people that Vallee is involved with, Hal Puthoff, Diana Pasulka, and all those people, actually went and met Bledsoe and in a way validated, quote unquote, his experiences. And then, and I'm saying this because Seriah, you had a really interesting episode recently with Mike Cleland and
Marty Garza. Yeah.
Yes, that they mentioned this stuff. So yeah, I mean, volume 6 is important. It's just to wrap this story up, but at the same time, there's a lot of gaps in the information that Vallee shared, and I can understand that. I can understand the idea behind it, and also the idea that his archives, which are currently being held and guarded by the Rice University, have a 10-year moratorium, which means that researchers will have to wait a decade until they can actually go and petition to go through them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's also a function of the fact that these are more recent diaries. I mean, the first of his diaries, there are people who have either passed away or aren't involved in certain fields, and the closer you get to the current day, you kind of have to be a little bit more guarded with what you say and don't say.
Yeah.
I mean, Vallee kind of hints to the idea that there is he uncovered material which is pretty scandalous and possibly related to what we're saying about clandestine incursions that were UFO simulations, and maybe even also the idea about clandestine experiments, possibly some of them conducted with children.
Right, and this is sort of body snatchers in the desert territory.
Body snatchers in the desert is mentioned plenty in Forbidden Science, both 5 and 6, along with Project Beta. And along with also Final Events. Final Events is mentioned a lot and kind of confirms the idea that the Collins elite really did exist. Kit Green, I mentioned earlier, apparently was tried to be that the Collins elite tried to recruit him, back in the 1980s, but he declined.
Huh.
So yeah, the idea that there was this group deep inside the U.S. government with really big, important connections, probably with the military brass, had these notions or these beliefs. I don't know how sustained or how well grounded with these beliefs were, that the UFO phenomenon is demonic in nature.
Yeah, that's something I can't honestly get behind, just because of the idea that to be demonic puts you in a particular perspective.
Sure. I mean, I guess, what can I say? In volume 6, and I know that we're almost reviewing Vallee's book by now, but this is the thing that is freshest in my mind.
Yeah,
but in volume 6, it really shows how their view of the UFO phenomenon turned more and more negative. Like, they were really convinced that the UFO phenomenon is not really good for mankind.
Interesting.
Would you be comfortable, Seriah, saying that you could admit to that possibility if the label of demon is just an inaccurate placeholder for
Yeah. Yes.
In other words, it serves the same function throughout different worldviews, but it doesn't necessarily need to have that Judeo-Christian baggage attached to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair.
But I don't see, I really feel like the majority of people who interact with UFOs have bad experiences because they're fighting what's happening to them, when what's happening to them resembles more of a shamanic awakening, but we have no context in our culture for that. So, and then of course they get hypnotized and they create false memories about all this horrible stuff happening to them, and it just escalates from there.
No one said that shamanic initiations were a walk in the park either.
No, right, and that's the thing. Yeah.
If someone had interviewed Saint Francis of Assisi, who supposedly received all those really nasty injuries on his body,
yeah,
they probably say, well, that's a really negative outcome from this encounter of yours. Obviously, he had a different interpretation with that, but nonetheless, there's this idea that Vallee and his group, back when they were on the BAS project, back when they were sponsored by the government, like the OSAP contract, they did investigated several cases in which witnesses were harmed by UFO encounters, to the point that I even asked Vallee recently, how safe it is for people to actually try to engage the phenomenon actively. If I were to see a UFO up close, would it be safe to actually come closer to it, or should I keep my distance?
And also, then look at the case in Texas, whose name I'm not going to remember. There, the two women and a kid, Cash Landrum. Yeah. So was that a UFO or was that a military project? Because it very well could have been a military. To me, it seemed like it was a military project that got out of control.
I think that thereafter, well, it gets difficult too, though, because perceiving the divine has always carried sort of a price. There's
right.
You don't casually walk up to the Ark of the Covenant. Moses had to take off his sandals for the burning bush.
And angels are terrifying.
Yeah.
Angels are terrifying, and they can be harmful. The things that Vallee and the group investigated, especially Vallee on his own, was all the cases from Brazil. The cases from Brazil seem to have the distinction that there are more cases in which the witnesses were harmed, and one is there's to ask the question, why is that? Why is it about Brazil? And the other day it occurred to me, okay, if I were to give a Gaia interpretation, well, Brazil is the country that has the most territory covered with rainforest that is currently being ravaged and destroyed.
That's true.
But so maybe this is something out of a response to that, response to our raping of nature.
And that's a very good point. Also, is it possible that that's where we're okay experimenting on people?
Well, that's also true. Like I said, Vallee is very frustrating when he said that for the longest time, this guy, Kit Green, went out and investigated the Brazilian cases. And he said that the Brazilian cases were something of a PSYOPs operation conducted by the military, and let us remember that Brazil back in the 1970s, probably in the 1980s, was a military dictatorship.
Yeah.
Right. So the military were the ones running the place. And this is something that was counter to Vallee's interpretation of the cases that he personally investigated, in which he found true paranormal activity. But then, he goes and writes something that, in his notes, saying, as in 2024, I have finally reconciled this divergence of opinions. Turns out that Kit and I are talking about different cases from different times. And that's it. He doesn't go further than that. Like, what?
Yeah. So, two things. I would like to circle back around to the nuclear question, but
yes, please.
Two things that I think might be worth opening up for discussion here, since we've shifted over into general UFO talk. The first of which is that I think have I talked about this, Seriah? That I think that we have been present for one of those sea changes of UFO shapes with the drone flap
Maybe.
from last year. I don't know if I have. I certainly haven't talked about it in person with Miguel, but I remember, Miguel, I wrote you one time and I was like, yeah, I think we're going to start seeing drones. And you're like, well, people haven't really been reporting Tic Tacs. I'm like, you just wait. And now, regardless of what those things over New Jersey were, the public mind has synthesized, well, however you want to put it, there's a conflation between drones and UFOs now in the public mind, and I think that the phenomenon is going to continue adapting and adopting that. One thing that I'm pretty sure we haven't talked about, though, is the and I'm trying to throw this out there and get people's takes on it, but I believe that, from what I can tell, having talked to some people in MUFON and such, I think like those abductions of the 70s and 80s and 90s, I don't think they happen that much anymore. I think the sense from investigators on the ground that I've been hearing is that it's more about consciousness effects, contact, maybe your consciousness going somewhere else.
Right,
but it's not so much about like, oh, we're going to take you bodily and take you up to a craft and put you on the examination table and dissect you. Not saying that doesn't happen. This stuff is never one size fits all, right?
Right.
But I am saying that when I listen to people's experiences, even as I do, which is more passively, I'm not hearing stories about people having those things that are full of surgical pageantry. It's all sounds much more like an altered state of consciousness or a psychedelic trip.
Totally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like I said, maybe this is something about the data, how skewed it is. Like, for example, I was for the longest time, I used to think that the old cases of flying saucers actually landing on the ground and beings coming out of the craft were something that no longer happened. That happened in 1960s. Socorro case or so. But it didn't happen anymore. But once again, Jacques Vallee book, read these journals, guys. He investigated a landing case that happened in France in the 1990s. And I said, oh, cool. These are still happening. It's just that we don't hear about them.
Right.
And to him, it was really confounding. But because apparently that was a case that was investigated by the gendarmerie, the civil guard in France, who are officially sanctioned to investigate UFO cases as part of their program to investigate them on an official capacity. So I don't know, the idea that we don't hear about abduction cases like the ones that happened in the 70s and 80s anymore. Well, how much of that is because Bud Hopkins died?
Right.
And he's no longer here to gather those cases and publish them and
well, not just gather them, but also sort of create them by hypnotizing people into those.
Well, there's that. Yeah, there's that, and definitely Vallee is not kind with Hopkins in his.
Oh, really?
Memo. Oh no. And I can't say I disagree with that view. I feel that like Mike Lennon is a friend of ours, and Mike personally knew Hopkins, and he can vouch for his honest, earnest desire to help people.
Yeah.
But, some of the worst atrocities were committed by people who had the best intentions.
Sure.
Like Mother Teresa in Calcutta. I'm sure she had the best of intentions trying to help the people who were helpless in India. But that doesn't mean that her organization actually did the best for them.
Yeah. And with Bud too. I mean, he's human. He was human.
Sure.
You can get carried away when you start believing that you have the answer to this thing. And
not only you have the answer, but you have the responsibility to sound the clarion call. Raise the alarm that we are being invaded. That we are being breached from our perimeter. The same thing happened with Paul Benowitz.
Right.
And I think that where you have this urgency is when you're the most vulnerable to manipulation. Also, one thing that I think nobody has actually really researched is whether Hopkins himself was manipulated by some agency, external agency.
It's certainly possible.
You know, I mean, we have the Linda Napolitano case, you know, and I guess the general consensus is that Napolitano made it all up, and she played Hopkins.
Yeah.
But what if that is not totally the case? What if someone was actually trying to get Hopkins to take the bait with these, what seemed to be the silver bullet that would prove once and for all that he was right all along? What if that served someone else's agenda?
Sure. And what's interesting, I mean, obviously Peter Robbins is still friends with Linda.
Sure.
And I don't necessarily have any reason to doubt her initial experience. Like if you watch the documentary, she talks about having what she thought were ghost experiences that she now labels as alien experiences. It's like, okay, so it's not that you probably didn't have an experience, but I doubt it was witnessed by a bunch of people. And then all the kidnapping and stuff by the agents, and all that seems like just attention grabbing for whatever reason. Peter will still defend it. One of the interesting things, though, he told me is that when they did the documentary, they not only had them wear certain types of clothing and do certain things, but they wanted her to swear a lot. And apparently she does not. And he's like, yeah, she was really uncomfortable because they're like, we need you to swear more. We want you to come across more gruff.
No, she smoked a lot, and she was honest. I will probably, after watching that documentary, I will side more with Linda's interpretation that with Carol Rainey. Carol Rainey felt that she wanted to have the last FU to both towards Bob and Linda.
Well, and that was one of the other things that Peter said, like that the two women at no point like really came to odds. Like obviously Carol had misgivings about her, but like they played it off as this, huge story that they've been feuding for years and turned it almost into a reality show type of thing,
Oh yeah, it was it really the way the documentary, and this is something that I wrote about it, the way the documentary was produced and it was edited out, it really felt like they were trying to mimic the adversarial Jerry Springer type of those talk shows that used to happen in the 1990s in the United States that are no longer the case, But I mean, for people who weren't alive back then, it was kind of almost like wrestling mixed up with 60 Minutes, professional wrestling mixed up with I don't know. Late Night with David Letterman.
Well, come on. The last time wrestling got mixed up with 60 Minutes was when John Stossel got smacked across the face by...
I have no idea what you're talking about. Remember, I'm not a wrestling fan, Seriah.
So back in the 80s, there was a John Stossel was investigating wrestling, and he went up to, I'm forgetting his name, big name wrestler at the time, never made it huge. Vince McMahon apparently told him, don't, play it up for him a little bit. So he went right up to him and he said, so wrestling's fake, right? And this guy just smacked him across the face. He goes, does that feel fake to you?
Right.
And then apparently he ruptured his eardrum when he hit him.
My God.
And he hit him like 2 or 3 times and Stossel just got the hell out of there. You can find it on YouTube if you Google it. It's a very famous clip.
Anyway, a few other things that I wanted to mention about UFOs and
all right,
and
we're talking about
energy.
UFOs. That's right.
Right. I mean, one of the things is that obviously this notion that we are interpreting this activity according to our expectations, like you said. The UFOs are concerned with our nuclear material or nuclear weapons because maybe they are afraid that we're going to blow ourselves up, and that's why they approach these nuclear silos. But then, if you interpret it in a different way, maybe UFOs are attracted to nuclear energy the same way, the same instinctive, non-rational way as moths are attracted to the light of a light bulb. It's not that the moth thinks, "Oh, human, you are wasting too much energy. You should switch to LED lights or something." And this is something that actually Dave Grosh, the whistleblower that caused all the rage, I guess 2 years ago. I guess that's how fast these fads come and go.
Is that how long it was? Man.
Probably. I think he came up in 2023. Anyway, he made the same argument in a YouTube video with this guy, Jesse Michaels or Jesse Mitchells. I don't know how to pronounce his name. And I was like, son of a, he stole my line. But yeah, he's right. This is the problem. We are trying to interpret UFO activity according to certain expectations, right. But then again, that's just an interpretation. Oh, a UFO comes closer to an airplane. It's like, oh, well, maybe they're trying to, attract our attention because they're trying to make their presence be known. It's like, well, what if they're just playing? The same way that, I don't know, a dolphin plays with a guy that is crossing the ocean in a kayak,
I mean, the Marfa like to behave like that.
Exactly, in a playful kind of like, we're gonna scare you, it's like a bull charging you. It's not really, they're not trying to harm you. It's just like, that's what bulls do.
Right. So the other question would be, is there an abnormally high number of UFO sightings around nuclear sites or nuclear plants or places where there's nuclear weapons versus the bulk of anywhere else?
And again, that's a problem with how skewed information can be, because we know that there are fewer places on Earth that are as highly monitored and surveilled and guarded as military installations, right? So if we cover the entire surface of the Earth as with the same amount of monitor sensors as we cover these installations, we would find perhaps that's not the case. It's the same way with all these cases of UFO activity. This is the places where there is the most amount of UFO activity, and said, well, guess what? They coincide with the places where there is a higher index of population.
Right.
Right. Like, obviously, the more people you have, the more you're going to have people reporting UFOs. Oh, duh.
Right. Josh, you've been quiet.
No, I'm just listening. I think that, it is a question. Well, it's similar again to the question of what was going on over in New Jersey. Like, I think that most of those drones that we're seeing were terrestrial, right? But the question begs itself, what happens when people actually start paying attention to the sky? Are they actually going to finally see that what's been there this whole time that they're just not paying attention to?
Right.
So, and that's sort of the same character as what you're getting at. Like, we're making these assumptions based on where we're looking. And, there's this great anecdote from World War II where some of the Allied planes were coming back, and what they decided to do was they decided to reinforce the parts of the airplane that had the most bullet holes. Like, obviously, these are the parts that are the most vulnerable to enemy fire. The ones that, every time people come back, they'd take note of which parts of the plane got the most bullet holes, and they would put extra plating on that. But what they didn't realize is that only the planes that weren't taken down were the ones that came back.
Right.
So the parts that you needed to reinforce were the parts that you never saw, damaged on these airplanes.
That's a good point.
And I think that's the sort of logic problems that we very rarely apply as a collective, 14 collective, UFO collective, to this question. Is thinking about things from that other angle.
Yeah, which is why we're talking about people noticing to activity on the sky. And the big gap, of course, in our information is the activity that is taking place below the surface, under our oceans.
Right.
And this is the thing about USOs and purported encounters between, military submarines and objects that are traveling way beyond the capabilities of any vessel made by man. And this is another interesting thing. We're talking about trying to find correlations and causations. One of the most famous UFO case in our records is obviously the Pascagoula abduction that happened in 1973. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I managed to learn, again, reading Jacques Vallee journals, is that these guys were abducted not very far away from where the U.S. Navy has a shipyard where they build they have a dry dock for nuclear submarines. And not only that, but apparently they had reports of USOs in that same location, people seeing something like a torpedo with very bright lights, like strobe lights or that we're seeing traveling below the surface of the water. So there's that, Another interesting case of possible correlation causation is Vallee mentions how, I don't know where he got this data, or apparently one of the places where the U.S. government decided to stockpile nuclear weapons after 1947 was a little town called Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Right. Yeah.
Which is of course the place where one of the most famous UFO close encounters took place in the 1950s. We're talking, of course, about the Hopkinsville goblins. So obviously we can say, therefore that. But I guess if you're trying to find some kind of correlation between UFOs and nuclear activity, I'm sure you'll find it. But is it really, a close link, or is it just, related?
So one of the things that convinced me more than anything else, and this is probably not going to be a very helpful thing to say because this is not a visual medium and you don't have access to the presentation, but there was a presentation that Adam Sane did through the Strange Reality streaming programs of my friend Marco Acevedo, who did a presentation about the way that atomic age anxieties and imagery are reflected in the UFO. And I do think that there's something to be said, something interesting about the similarities between the mushroom cloud and the mushroom and the top of the UFO, of the flying saucer. And I've told Marco numerous times, like, this needs to be a book, but I think that he uses so many different images that it would be a nightmare from a copyright perspective to get assembled. But it was a really compelling presentation that sort of, you can even think of the vision of an atom with its orbits and its nucleus at the center is almost like the orbit. It's almost like the a top-down view of a flying saucer with a little cupola, in the center as well, like you sometimes see on some of these depictions. So I don't. There feels like something. It feels like there's something there, but I cannot put a pin in it, and I don't know exactly what it is.
Interesting. Reminds me of this famous photograph that I think it was taken in the 1970s. One of the first flights of the Concorde, and there were a lot of journalists that were present in that maiden flight, and someone took a picture and apparently managed to record a UFO following the Concorde, and they managed to zoom in into the image. And if you look into the image, I'm sure you can find it online. It looks like the top of a mushroom, but it is glowing a very fiery orange kind of color.
Well, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Quick mid-show break here. Some contact info and a recommendation. So contact info is pretty simple. wheredidtheroadgo.com. From there, you can find everything Where Did the Road Go related. All the shows all the way back to the first one. Links to all our social media, our Discord, and a link tree to all of my stuff. So my other radio shows like The Last Exit for the Lost, my photography, all that stuff can be found in the link tree link at the top of the page.
Also at the top of the page is the Patreon link, which is only $3 a month, and it gets you shows weeks early at this point because I'm behind, as well as extra content from almost every show, as well as extra special stuff now and again. And it's only $3 a month, and it helps us out immensely to keep this show going. All right, my recommendation for this week. I'm going to go with a movie called Aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A. It came out in 2023. And being a time travel sort of movie, it definitely, I definitely liked it because that's one of my favorite genres is like things that mess with time. And this one, it almost reminds me of Primer in some ways. It's very low key. It's very independent feeling. It's well done. I don't want to say too much about it because it's not actually time travel. I'll read you the little blurb on IMDb. Since losing her husband, Sophia struggled to manage grief, a full-time job, and parenting her devastated daughter. But when a former physicist reveals a secret time-bending machine, Sophie will be faced with an impossible choice. This was really good. I really liked it. So that's my recommendation for this week. Aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A. All right, back to the show. So I'm here with Red Pill and Joshua Cuthcin, the OGs of the round table. Sort of. I guess Red Pill's almost an OG. I think you were in like the second batch of people I brought in.
Interesting.
Because I think it was Mike Hughes at first. It was Mike Hughes, Josh, and myself.
Okay.
And then I think Josh said, why don't we have Red Pill? And I said, why don't we have Red Pill?
Yeah, I remember receiving your message like at 3 a.m. I was probably playing a video game or something. It's like, oh, finally.
About time.
I'm going places.
I have, we did a show a few weeks back on Seneca Lake UFO sightings. And one of my oldest friends who has lived in this area sent me this message, if I could just find it. I thought I had it pulled up, but it does make a nuclear connection here. Nope, that is totally not what I wanted to click on. Here we go. So he says he and his wife were just listening to the show on the Seneca Lights. She says her and her mom and dad were living in Vallee, which is on Seneca Lake, on Searsburg Road, and would go out at night to watch these lights over the lake. This would have been the early 70s. My grandparents lived in Ovid, where the old Napa was downtown. Where the old Napa was down near the school on the second floor. My grandfather worked 3 to 11 at Willard, and I remember many of us going up out on the balcony to watch these lights over the lake, and this would have been in the same time frame. Also, his wife's dad worked at the depot, the Seneca Army Depot, and said that there were definitely nuclear warheads stored underground there, and even the Deer Park tour says this. So there are white deer in the Seneca Army Depot, which is no longer an active Army depot. It's now half a prison, and the other half is like apartment or housing and stuff. But they have a whole section that's still closed off that have a rare species of white deer in it.
I mean, also remember Grant Cameron, who is a Canadian UFO researcher, who became interested in this phenomenon because of the Charlie Red sightings that took place in the 1970s. Yeah. And I think there was a correlation between apparently these objects were leaving the Canadian territory very close to a nuclear military installation in the U.S. territory.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if Minnesota or I'm not really that well versed with U.S. Canadian geography, but there seemed to have been a correlation there.
Huh. I mean, it's also fair to say that there are military bases everywhere.
Yes.
So, and there are power plants everywhere. So, I mean, the one really interesting case turns out to be the one where the nuclear missiles were they turned off or turned on when a UFO was overhead.
I think in the United States they were turned off, and according to the lore, in the Soviet Union they were turned on.
Okay, Josh, did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to say it was a Malmstrom in the U.S., Malmstrom Air Force Base.
Okay.
Base.
Also, because my brain does this, Charles Schultz was the wrestler who hit Stossel. It just offered that up now, 15 minutes later? It's like, oh yeah, Schultz. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, when you get something like that where it's turning them on and off, is that an electromagnetic effect or is that intentional?
Right.
And if it
right.
and if it is intentional, is it one of ours?
Meaning, is it like a test on ourselves?
Right.
Sort of
Because,
thing?
well,
Yeah.
how useful would it be to have an aircraft that could fly over, say, a Soviet missile silo and turn it off?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it'll be. I would like to put in an order for about 400 of those right now, please. Thank you. Yeah, I mean that's sort of the same question. It's kind of the brimstone deceit question, right? When you're dealing with craft and not occupants, you have to sort of start to ask, like, well, how much of this is a deliberate, like, for example, with the smells, how much of this is this a deliberate smell? Is it a smell of a reaction with the environment?
Yeah.
Is it like a side effect? Is it one of these different things? And that is an important question. The same can be said for engine stoppages and appliance malfunctions. Like, is that deliberate or is that a side effect, a byproduct? I think a case can be made for either. I hope to sort of tackle that issue in the future at some point, but I remain ambivalent on which is a more accurate interpretation.
One case that seemed to show kind of like a direct involvement or like actual engagement or with the phenomenon. It's the famous, it is kind of famous, the idea of the Big Sur film. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. Is something that supposedly took place in 1964. There was this missile test that happened in California, and there was this guy that was in charge of filming the test, and supposedly, according to the story, then the big brass took him for questioning, because when they run the film, they managed to see some kind of like object, like a saucer, like shooting beams into the missile until finally the missile was destroyed or something. I don't know. Have you guys heard about this?
Yes.
Okay. I think the name of the guy who filmed this is Robert Jacobs. Now, the thing is, some people have contested this theory, and supposedly the real film was posted on YouTube only recently and doesn't really show anything of the sort. You don't really see any kind of UFO shooting beams into the missile. So some people say, well, Robert Jacobs is either a liar or he misinterpreted the case or misremembered, whatever. I don't know. I don't have an opinion on the matter at the moment. And apparently Robert Jacobs was one of the people who tried to get an interview with Arrow, with Sean Kirkpatrick at the time, and I think he was turned down or something. He was really mad about it because I think he felt that his testimony was important. And indeed, if this actually happened, it's something that people should hear about it, how, UFOs have the ability to actually shoot down missiles in midair. But anyway, I guess this Big Sur film remains anecdotal at best at the point.
Yeah, because we don't know if what's posted on YouTube is real.
Yeah, exactly. Even though there are people like Luel Elizondo who said, oh yeah, he saw the video, back when he was running ATIP,
Right.
But of course, why didn't he try to release that video instead of the crappy Navy videos that we have seen like a gazillion times?
Right.
By now, since 2017, remains a mystery.
I was going to follow that up with saying, but I lost it. I'll just go with David Schultz. No, that's not.
David Schultz.
Anything to add, Josh?
I think we would be remiss if we didn't sort of acknowledge part of what prompted this whole conversation in the Where Did the Road Go Slack. Our good buddy Saxon said that he had realized that there are extensive uranium deposits through the American Southwest and Utah and New Mexico.
Yeah.
And he found it coincidental, and I don't disagree that there is so much UFO activity in that part of the country. And I off the cuff I threw out this idea that, like, what if UFOs are radioactive mineral, radioactive elementals. Like, we think about, there's a tree elemental called a dryad, and there's, the fairies are the spirits of the flowers. What if the spirit of atomic deposits is whatever the UFO is? And I don't talk about unfalsifiable, right? I mean, it's not much that you can do with that beyond just like wonder and think. But I think that I kind of wonder if there aren't certain human actions that activate things that have been dormant.
I mean, from a mythological point of view, it works beautifully. I mean, the number one mythology that converges nuclear energy with, a destructive alien force is, of course, Godzilla, right? It's the
right.
thing that it is one of our most cherished modern myths, right? And in a way, I think it really speaks about this idea of, okay, we created this technology, and this technology could have a mind of its own, right?
Yeah.
Something that is uncontrollable and wreaks havoc and really can't be reasoned with. We only think we have control over it because we created it. But, it's almost like saying that you have control over your children because you you spawned them,
Well, some parents try.
Yeah, to this day.
Well, I think that I think that part of what further cemented the relationship between UFOs and the atomic age is all the media that came out during that time period. I think that a lot of those had nuclear themes as well, but even when they were sort of invasion pictures, they were kind of a Godzilla-esque stand-in for a worldwide catastrophe that would be a nuclear Armageddon, nuclear Holocaust situation.
And I mean, if these things are partially, co-created by us, I mean, if we were all scared of nuclear Armageddon in the 80s. So, I mean, that could be putting a little bit of its form there, that they're appearing near missile silos, near nuclear power plants, things like that as well.
Right. And after a certain point, like, who's to say we haven't just egregorized atomic energy to the point that there is a relationship there and it manifests as the UFO.
Yeah. And I mean, it's impossible to say, well, let's look at old accounts because there's nothing nuclear that we can, adjust it to, kind of. I mean, if you take the Southwest, I mean, there's probably less of a population in a lot of the areas that you're getting UFO reports, but there's also a lot of military bases out there.
Right.
Like, so no matter which way you look, you end up with the same sort of equation where it's like, it's hard to separate what's us from what's not us. And, is there really that much more around nuclear stuff than there is anywhere else? Like I said, the turning on and off the missiles, that's interesting.
Well, and then you can also, like, if you really want to go down this route with what is it about the Southwest? What is it about these certain locations? Like, you can just sort of like free associate, play the archetypal free association game. Like, the American Southwest looks a lot like the surface of Mars.
Yeah.
We can say that, rocketry is what was one of the driving forces behind the atomic age, and that's obviously linked in with our space program as well, and that makes sense too. I think that you could just keep on going on and on and on with these sort of correlations and correspondences that make flying saucers and UFOs feel at home in that part of the U.S. Not that they're exclusively there, but you take my meaning. Yeah,
but at the same time, I mean, maybe the reason that people find more UFO cases in the American Southwest is because they are easier to find there, where there's really nothing there. It's arid desert, than, say, the tundra in Tunguska.
Well, and I think we should also be aware of, like, what we feel like is the case versus what is literally the case. By which I mean the fact that like a lot of the maps that show the density of UFO sightings tend to line up with bodies of water, which makes sense in terms of populations and how they're distributed to observe the UFOs. So I'm not entirely sure that you can say the Southwest is UFO central. A lot of the mythology comes from there, but it's not necessarily where the phenomenon happens. Yeah,
right. But there is the idea that Roswell became a central point of mythologizing about the modern era. It's the place where Robert Goddard started to make his first experiments with rocket propulsion, and then that's the place where the United States government decided to test their first nuclear weapons. Why there? Well, because the land was freely available. It was cheap, and it was easy to take the land away from the Indians.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's easier to keep the land and then to put there our nuclear bombers. That's where you have the Roswell Army Air Force bomber unit, and then from there we go to Roswell. Maybe that's where people were. The army was also conducting the Mogul tests. The infamous Mogul tests that were trying to ascertain using balloons whether the Soviets were conducting nuclear detonations. Trying to detect those detonations in the upper atmosphere. So I don't know, like Joshua said, I mean, it's almost like trying to ascertain how many angels can dance, on the head of a nail. It's so difficult. That's probably one of the reasons why people like Jacques Vallée try to create artificial intelligence database. He called it Capella, in order to try to make sense of all this mess. But then he was shut down, by his own colleagues, because they didn't see the point, or they were too busy trying to actually find access to the UFO hardware. And by hardware, I mean the actual, supposedly debris that is stored by, private contractors.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, I've heard Greg say this, although I think it might have originated with some other people, but, we don't study UFOs, we study UFO reports, right?
True.
So like, who knows what you're ever going to be able to learn from these reports that might have, how much noise is in that data. There's just no way to tell.
Yeah. Vallée came to that conclusion, and he said that no matter how much information you manage to put into the database, if you don't have people who are well informed in order to make decisions about it, artificial intelligence is not going to give you a magic answer.
Right, which sort of brings us back to that idea of like, what do we know about UFOs? What can we say we know about UFOs? And one of the things that David Metcalf said to me was, it's almost like apophatic theology. Which is knowing God through what God isn't, knowing God through negation. And once you figure out what the UFO isn't, then, as David puts it, there's your UFO.
Right. I think it was some Saint Augustine who said, I'm not going to repeat it, the phrase in Latin, but it's something to the effect of, if you can understand it, then it isn't from God. And I guess it's kind of like the same with UFOs, that if you are trying to understand UFOs from theories that make sense to you, chances are you're making the wrong assumptions.
I mean, and the thing is, I don't think any of these phenomena, UFOs or any paranormal phenomena, have a single explanation. So there's also that problem of, what are we encountering? Are we encountering earth lights, earthquake lights? Are we encountering actual craft of some sort? Are they ours? Are they from elsewhere? And that elsewhere, is that another dimension? Is it another phase of reality? Is it another planet? I mean, we have lots of questions that we can't really answer. And there's probably plenty of people out there who will tell you they have all the answers, but realistically, none of those answers are proven. So, I mean, it's you don't even really know where to start when you really honestly look at it.
I think we do know where to start. I mean, I came to that conclusion several years ago, and I think that honestly feel that the place we should put the area we should put our efforts in is try to understand human consciousness and human perception, trying to understand better how, external impulses manage to create stimuli that, create qualia, that actually create our sense of self, and from there also understand how consciousness probably is not generated by our own brains, how they're probably it is not an epiphenomenon that is the result of just firing of neurons in our gray matter. That is maybe something more fundamental. I honestly feel that is the avenue we should have tried to put our attention before try to understand all the other stuff, because at the end of the day, all the other stuff ends up being interpreted by our consciousness, ends up in the same basket.
Yeah, and this is why I found like the Invisible Gorilla such a valuable book, because it shows you how unreliable our senses and perceptions are.
Right. Like one of the things that Vallee mentions in, I think is the 6th volume, is this report that was created by someone in the British Ministry of Defense. I think it is known as the Condine Memo or the Condine Report. And this is a theory that was put forward by the British military. The idea that UFOs, the energy emanated by the UFO, somehow affects the witness through some kind of a stimulation of their temporal lobe in their brain and actively creates hallucinations, right? So this is a way, kind of like an interesting, almost parsimonious way of saying, okay, there's this UFO energy that may or may not be intelligent, may or may not be, something artificial. But nevertheless, this energy is interfering with the perception of the witness in ways that is creating all these artificial scenarios. So maybe to another external witness, they will see the witness in front of maybe an orb or some kind of like plasma energy. But to the other witness, the one closer to the energy, they will see a completely different scenario. Maybe something in which they have interaction with beings coming from craft, and maybe they receive a message and whatever. And maybe that will also come in correspondence with the co-creation aspect of it. The energy somehow creates the scenario closer to dream activity.
Yeah.
And it is a really interesting idea. Obviously, how can you falsify it unless you have access to that energy? We have some experiments that seem to kind of like give credence to these ideas in the form of the God helmet, right? That some people were developing I think it was in the 1970s, in the 1980s, in which you stimulate through magnetic fields some areas of the brain of a person wearing this helmet, and some people really have very vivid hallucinations, some akin to mystical experiences. So definitely that is an aspect that gives credence to the idea that the human mind is very susceptible to stimulations through electromagnetic energy.
Absolutely.
And this needs to be taken into account.
Man, I'm forgetting the name of the doctor who did that.
Persinger.
Michael Persinger. Yes.
There we go. And Persinger originally was touting it as an explanation for paranormal experiences, but at the end, he said that he didn't feel this really explained anything about the experiences themselves.
Right.
So
well, and it was never really replicable either.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, other people tried to make God helmets, and they didn't work quite the same.
Yeah, and and it was Stanley Coren and Persinger, and never really reproduced. And like I've worn the Corrin helmet, and I was aware of what I was supposed to feel, and so like I can't really say that I did feel what I was supposed to feel, but maybe I kind of felt like I felt what I was supposed to feel. I don't know.
What did you feel?
I did have so this is a bit of a long story that I can't fully reveal because there was an NDA that was attached to it. But I was at a research site, and there was it was an intent, and I was aware of a sensed presence in the room was something that you were supposed to be aware of, or something that you're supposed to intuit while wearing the God helmet. And so I had my eyes closed the entire time. And once or twice I felt like there was someone in the room with me, and asked if there was anybody in the tent with me at that time. And the person who was sort of handling my session said no. So I don't know. Like I was sort of looking for that as a thing. So who can say? I did not perceive any. I see more things behind my eyelids when I lay down to go to sleep at night. Like I didn't really get anything of that.
Right.
Of that,
So I want to go back to this. So Josh had to sign an NDA. Josh, are you a disinfo agent?
No.
Were you trying to pilot the UFO, Josh?
Honestly, with the way my finances right now, I kind of wish I was a disinfo agent so I could have more money.
Were you taken to Area 51? Did you see the aliens on the pickle?
I saw the aliens, and I'm trying to get everyone off of that scent by saying that they're fairies. That's the play. That's the play. It was not that much of a. It was kind of meh. That was kind of my sensation. Meh.
Oh, well, it seems like a good place to end it. Josh is a disinfo agent, and
meh is a good place to end it. Yeah.
All right, Josh, where can people find all your stuff?
You can find it at joshuacuthcin.com. I have my new book out, Fourth Wall Phantoms, that you can get either through Amazon or directly through me at my website. Just send me an email. I have several events coming up. On May 17th, I will be in Hamptonville, North Carolina for the one-day event at the Trivette Clinic. That's Trivette Clinic Parafest. Trivette Clinic Parafest 2025. And then towards the end of the summer, at the beginning and end of August, I will be in Kansas City and Cape Girardeau, Missouri, for two different conferences as well. So go to my website, joshuacuthcin.com, and check out more information like that, more information about that if you want to come see me in person.
And Red Pill?
Well, you can find me first at the Daily Grail, dailygrail.com, where you can find articles written by me or by Greg Taylor, all our news briefs. And you can also find my personal website, absurdbydesign.com, where you can see some of my artwork, designs I've made over the years, cover designs, illustrations. I'm available for work. I feel I need to
hire this man. Hire this man.
Please, I don't want to die living under a bridge like a troll.
Well, but then you'd fall into the fairy realm, and then maybe Josh could pull some strings.
Oh, well, if I can end up in the troll market, I guess I could make a living there.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go in and rescue you like Hellboy in the troll market. Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you for this.
Really appreciate it. It was a blast talking with y'all, and hopefully more of this in the future.
Yeah, same.
I want to thank all of my Patreons for their support and help keeping this show alive. It is because of you I can keep doing this, and I thank every single one of you. Special shout out though goes to you a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more a month. Greg Ross, Cherry Trapezoid, John Blackburn, Madeline J, Mark Smith, Marty Garza, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, 36 Dingo, Tim, Matthew Sproul, Marthartha, Tyler Glimstead, Christine, Abby Allen, Patricia Giaquinta, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Bill Illuminati, Bright Rectangle, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Corey Nelson, Diane B, Empty K, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, Jay, Jack Huntington,
James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Jonathan Frost, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda from Michigan, Linz Jackson K., MJ Armstrong, Mark Shoemaker, Mark Brady, Mothman Bren, Automaton, Paul Jeffries, Perry Peters, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Sasha McHale, Schmooples, Devourer of Mortal Souls, Stacy Sherwood, Strange Stories with the Seeker and Skeptic podcast, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Varosh K, Victoria, Vincent Trewell, Will Cherry, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDD Skunkworks, Colin Karras, Craig Sagastumi, and Matthew Brown. Thank all of you so much for the support. There is a Patreon segment to go along with this show, and it's only with Red Pill and I, but it's a pretty long segment. So if you enjoyed what you heard, you can check that out. You can just pick a segment and pick it off Patreon for $3 or so, or you can subscribe for $3 a month and get all the Patreon content, the show's weeks early at this point, commercial free, etc., etc. It's a lot for just $3 if you like the show. And I throw extra special stuff in there occasionally as well. I want to welcome a few new Patreons. Tyler Glimstead, Contemplative Mystic Abroad, and Elizabeth W. Thank you all for joining up. And inspired a little bit by Welcome to Night Vale. And if you've never listened to Welcome to Night Vale, you probably should. If you like quirky, weird sort of podcasts. Yeah, it's a comedy podcast, but it's not an out-and-out comedy podcast. If you've never heard it before, it's the thing that got me into listening to audio fiction. Honestly, it's pretty witty and funny. And at the end, they have these proverbs that they make up, and I don't have any proverbs for you. But I thought maybe cool quotes from people or things. In this case, the Babylon 5 spinoff Crusade. I always loved this quote. And it goes like this. Despite the best advice of people who know what they're talking about, other people insist on doing the most massively stupid things. I do think that sums up our world in a lot of ways. And that comes from the very short-lived Babylon 5 spinoff Crusade, which could have been amazing, but unfortunately got canceled because, Turner did a massively stupid thing and wanted it to be Baywatch meets wrestling in space, which it just wasn't. See you next time.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.